Good morning. This is Mike McWilliams. I am your host and the Chief Revenue Officer for Reliable IT. It's my pleasure to introduce you our MC, Lance Godsword. Lance has been, him and I have worked together for about 20 years now. He says a decade, but it feels more like 20. He was a client for many, many years with me, and then has now come on to serve as our CXO consultant for Reliable IT. Lance has over 20 years experience in information technology, and he has hosted and emceed our summits for many, many years. So Lance, take it away and thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the country, and welcome to the Emergency Survival Guide, Protecting Your Bank and Revenue in 2020 webinar. My name is Lance Godsword, and I'll be your MC today. We're glad you're here and believe your time spent with us will be well worth it. We have a fantastic panel of speakers lined up covering a variety of backgrounds. We expect each of you to walk away from this webinar with more insight on how you can both protect and build your company during the crisis. Please note, we'll be taking questions from the audience throughout this webinar. If you have any questions for the panel, please submit them to the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to put them in front of the panel on your behalf. Please let me start by thanking the following leaders for their willingness to participate in this forum during a very busy and stressful time for us all. Their participation in this is a testament to their shared goal of improving the world of banking. Our shared goal for today is to learn what technology solutions these leaders have implemented and or capitalized on to not only survive, but thrive during the crisis. While it's critical for our banking leaders to act to preserve, to protect assets in 2020, it's also crucial that we look for opportunities to grow. And we'll discuss how our approach must change. Ultimately, our goal is to get through this short-term crisis, minimize loss, and come out on the back end of the situation set up to both catch up and move past historical performance. For these reasons, we're interrupting the normal course of your day to provide this special edition Emergency Survival Guide. Please allow me to start by introducing you to our panelists. First, Christopher Williston is the president and CEO of the Independent Bankers Association of Texas, the largest state association dedicated exclusively to community bank advocacy. Prior to leading IBAT, Mr. Williston served for 9 years in numerous roles, including Chief Operating Officer, and held the position of Director of Communications at the National Association of Insurance Financial Advisors in Texas. Next, Gary Stephen Finley grew up in bank consulting business. The Finley organizations have been serving banks in California and the Western United States for more than 50 years. Mr. Finley is an attorney which specialized in banking and the owner of Gary Stephen Finley Associates. As a leading legal, economic, and management authority on banking, Mr. Finley has written and published numerous articles and frequently serves as guest speaker on multiple topics in the banking industry. Nikki Almazan is Vice President and Information Technology Director at Golden State Bank and serves on various executive committees. As a catalyst for strategic advancement, she develops strategic roadmaps that align digital initiatives with business-wide objectives, cultivates external partnerships, and leverages a data-driven approach to digital transformation and information security. She works arduously to educate and create processes to improve the customer and employee experience across a broad range of technology platforms. Micah Calloway is the IT manager for Mission Bank, headquartered in Bakersfield, California. Mission Bank is a fast-growing financial institution with 9 locations, providing business banking and lending services throughout California. Micah has nearly 20 years of experience in enterprise IT. Prior to joining Mission Bank, Micah worked in IT systems administration and management in the telecommunications, government, academic, and corporate sectors. Micah is a continuous change leader who strives to stay ahead of current industry trends and has successfully implemented a number of innovative IT projects within Mission Bank. Aaron Beal, the Chief Operating Officer for Reliable IT, has been in the technology industry for over 25 years, helping banks develop a solid foundation for their IT security. Aaron is passionate about exploring innovative options and solutions for companies and enjoys helping businesses utilize new methods to grow and prosper. And finally, with a 36-year career in the banking industry, Trish Nelson is an experienced compliance consultant with a demonstrated history of working in the management consulting industry. She has been actively working with Reliable IT since 2016. Her areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, business continuity planning, testing and risk assessments, policy development and deployment, compliance monitoring, and vendor management. Okay, that's it for introductions. Let's get started. Christopher, please feel free to kick us off with your State of the Union address.
Hey, thanks very much, Lance, and thank you, Mike, and the Reliable IT team for having me on the webinar today. It's a great pleasure to be with you all, especially with all these very, very distinguished panelists. I don't know how I snuck into the group, but I'm awfully glad to be here. You know, the State of the Union really changes on an hourly basis, and I think if you'd asked me this morning, probably could have predicted the one word that comes to mind, but I'll go ahead and throw it out there right now. At this moment, the State of the Union is frustrated. Of course, the PPP loan portals opened up a few hours ago, and every banker in the country, I think, really had their eye on that reality and trying to meet the needs of their small business customers, facilitation into the Paycheck Protection Program. I think that the portals were up for about 4 minutes before the servers were overloaded, and so now everyone's either locked out or not able to process loans into the program. So frustrated is the story of the day, although I don't think anyone's too surprised that they're frustrated. It's just a reality. You know, as a whole, and I know Gary's going to speak to this as well. The Paycheck Protection Program is the story of the day, not just today, but of the last 4 or 5 weeks. And I'll let him dig into that a little bit more. Other than there are really 3 big themes I think that bankers are looking for right now. There have been so many unanswered questions along the way, so many kind of ready, fire, aim moments as we've gone through this entire process. And right now, bankers are really looking for answers in 3 areas, and those are funding, fees, and forgiveness. The first being funding, just a huge loan volume. I mean, you're talking banks that are doing loans that are in the course of a week or two that are greater in volume than they did in all of 2019, or maybe in any given year. And there's a requirement, of course, right now that they fund those loans within 10 calendar days. That 10 calendar days, everybody's working around the clock to make that work, to make it happen. But it's extremely difficult in some cases for banks to just hit that mark. And so they're wondering, well, what happens if I go into day 11? What happens if I go into day 12? Does that somehow threaten my SBA guarantee, or does it in some other way set me up in an adverse position for the future? The second being fees. I mentioned the fact that bankers have been working around the clock. That's not a joke. I mean, I know many have made the observation that we're really redefining bankers' hours in the course of all this. You're talking 24 hours a day. One bank I talked to the other day said that their folks didn't even take Easter Sunday off. Maybe they took the morning off. They watched their church service or things via online, but they were back at it in the afternoon. Banks have been working around the clock, and we know that, of course, that there was funding set aside in the CARES Act to make sure that they're compensated for the origination and facilitation of the Paycheck Protection Program. But just how that's going to happen, when it's going to happen, nobody knows yet. That's extremely important. And as we look and think about, you spoke, Lance, in your opening about bank performance, and there's not, I mean, we all know the realities that we're living through right now. Loan performance and for the rest of 2020 and who knows how long is going to be impaired. And we've got an uphill climb out of this entire economic scenario. So really that short-term fee income can at least be something that the banks are looking forward to, helping them cover some of their costs throughout the season. And last but certainly not least is forgiveness. We don't even have any of the answers at this hour of how forgiveness is going to work, how it's going to be set up, really what the bankers are going to need to track, what borrowers are going to need to track. The goalposts have moved about 14 times throughout this process as a whole, and guidance continues to come out today that really keeps shifting those things. So, I question whether borrowers really know the fullness of what they were getting into at the time they applied for the loan. It's hard enough for bankers to keep up, but I think even more difficult for borrowers. The other question we have to ask is how much work, how intensive a process is it going to be for the bankers around the country to help monitor and facilitate the forgiveness process. Here in Texas, and this is something we'll all be looking at and dealing with eventually, there's now starting to become the questions more from customers than anything is just, well, when are bank lobbies going to be reopened? Our governor here in Texas, as I know a number of governors, have started the first steps towards reopening Texas. And while the banks have been fully operational, and I think really, I say you can pretty much do everything at the bank these days except come in and have a cup of coffee. As banks have shifted all of their operational customer needs either to the drive-through or by appointment in the lobby, there's really nothing they can't do, but there's still a little bit of pressure publicly for them to go ahead and open back up. So our bankers are asking, how do we do that? Does this require additional preparation? Do we need plexiglass at the teller stands? Do we need the social distancing stickers on the floor? What is this going to look like? One banker even told us of some elaborate plans in a very large bank lobby to bring a tent in and ventilate it to the outside so they would have airflow. I don't know that everybody's going to be prepared to go to quite those measures, but it brings up some very serious questions of how do you keep your bank staff safe, and how do you ensure that you're reopening and meeting all customer needs at the same time that you're keeping folks safe? So how do we do that? When do we do it? What is the timeline? Nobody wants to be first, and I think we're going to have to look at this slow and steady evaluation as we see other states or other types of businesses open up and see what the cumulative impact is on the abatement measures for the virus as a whole. And then, really the last question that I ask is just why? Where's the, other than pressure possibly from the outside, what's the upside right now for the bank to go ahead and take those measures? And I think, again, we may be earlier on in this discussion than a lot of states are. Certainly, I think the folks in California are not anywhere close to this yet, but they're the questions I think that our bankers are starting to really ask. All of this speaks to a reality that I think we have to be very aware of, and that is the fact that since this whole crisis began, let's call it March 15th, right, when a lot of people around the country really started to peak up and take notice the fact that this pandemic was real and that it was going to affect their way of life, the bankers' eyes have been off the ball. They've been off the ball in the sense that they had about a week to start thinking about, well, what does it do to my loan portfolio as a whole if all these borrowers have to be effectively closed for an extended period of time, or if you had a commercial property, what happens to that asset? Since that time, with the passage of the CARES Act, the facilitation of the PPP program, all of these operational questions and everything, their focus very much had to shift away from those kind of essential credit quality issues and on to other things to help facilitate everything that's gone on. At some point, bankers are going to need the latitude to be able to shift back to the central risks and the issues in their portfolio. All of this may change or be different as we see how effective reopening measures are, but you have to just think about, we have, for instance, retail to go is now allowed in Texas. Well, is that enough to get borrowers back into a positive cash flow position? If they have to maintain staff because they took a Paycheck Protection Program loan, are they going to be able to generate enough sales in some of these reopening efforts in order to be positive cash flow while keeping some of those folks on the payroll? These are all huge issues that we as an industry are going to have to watch and deal with. They're going to be central to our ability to come out of this crisis as a whole and restore performance, again, as you spoke to, Lance. And so these are the State of the Union. Right now, it's a lot more questions than answers, but hopefully every bank is looking at these and the other concerns.
Very good, Christopher. Thanks so much for getting us started. We appreciate it. Obviously, there have been a number of questions that have come in already, so you've gotten some people thinking. So before we move on to those, I would like to give the floor to Gary Finley. and get him give his State of the Union address. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Lance. First of all, it's good to be here, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this webinar. We think that these type of programs are needed for the community banking industry. And I also want to thank you on behalf of CCBN for Reliable IT to be part of associate member and also a valued partner for CCBN. If you can go to the second slide, Mike, I wanted to kind of give you some general thoughts. Can you guys all hear me? Okay. And and first of all, ditto to Christopher. I think he's dead spot on with regard to what's happening with regard to the industry at this moment in time. And some general thoughts that we have is that as part of this, 2019 performance was good, but saw some flattening at the year end with regard to financial performance numbers. Included in the Reliable IT packet was the ability to download the April 2020 Finley Reports newsletter, which kind of laid out the financial performance at year-end 2019 for a lot of our banking institutions. And for the most part, 2019 was good, and we were able to recognize a lot of banking institutions for some very solid performance. In fact, one of the banks on this agenda as a panelist is Mission Bank, who had a very strong return on equity of 19% and has been a solid performer in California for a number of years. What we've also seen basically is that while the year-end performance was good for the banking institutions, the first quarter performance has been choppy, much like what Mike has indicated. We've seen a compression in the net interest margin with the lowering of the interest rates. We've seen some provisions in the ALLL, even though we haven't seen the call reports coming out for a lot of institutions. A lot of the press releases that we've seen indicate some softening in the credit side and some ALLL provisioning. We've also seen shrinking loan demand, absent PPP, and then also loan deferrals are starting. One of the concerns that we have right now is because of what is happening with the economy, we don't know how you make a commercial real estate loan. We don't know how you get an appraisal. And so a lot of the banks are basically taking a pause at this moment in time and really trying to take a look at their portfolio at the same time as move forward with the PPP. As Christopher indicated, PPP has been the focus for the last few weeks. It has been extremely time consuming. The good part about it, it's been a great non-interest source for a lot of our banking institutions, and it's a mechanism by which these banks can show that they're really true community banks and lending to the small to medium-sized businesses. One of the positive things that we saw is that the average size of these loans are in the $200,000 range, and a lot of our community banks, especially in California, are basically making loans in the $100,000 to $150,000 range. That's very positive because if you can stay below the $350,000, then basically you get the maximum 5 points as part of the transaction. However, as Christopher indicated, a lot of people have questions about the loan forgiveness and how this is all going to work. But we found that our community banks are doing a fairly good job. We've seen a lot of press releases coming out with our community banks that indicate the number of businesses that they've been able to lend to and the number of employees they've been able to help as part of this process. And we're very happy, especially in the Western United States, that we've had tens of billions of dollars money going out from community banks and hundreds of thousands of employees being benefited basically by the PPP program. As Christopher also indicated, about 7:30 today, it says we had the opening of the portal. And then I'm even surprised we can have this webinar because I suspected that would suck all the bandwidth with regard to the number of PPP programs that would be sent into the SBA. But we think it is a good program, and most of our institutions are moving aggressively in this. One of the things that we're advising our banks is to not get carried away with the income being generated on the PPP and the non-interest source, but consider utilizing a significant portion of this revenue to look at ALLL and your existing loan portfolio. We do think that that there is going to be some issues for a lot of institutions, and we've already seen some significant provisions already on ALLL. One of the things we're also emphasizing is what I call our own vision or version of PPP, which we call the Pandemic Pivot Plan, which we're telling a lot of our institutions that the strategic plan that you put in or the business plan you put in for 2020, probably at the end of 2019, is out the wall or out the door. And that a lot of our banking institutions need to spend the time and looking at what the remaining portion of 2020 will look like. And I don't think they've had the time and really don't know how to move forward in this direction for the remaining portion of 2020. We think that's going to be critical. We also think that 2021 and 2022 actually will be a good time basically for some of our community banks, but they're the ones who are basically effectively planning. And we always talk about some things that we think are important. We emphasize what we refer to as a fortress type balance sheet. You absolutely have to know us as the strengths and weaknesses of your balance sheet, both from the asset and liability side. You have a stable income statement, and also you've got connection to your customers. We believe that part of the leadership role for our community banks has to be really understanding the strengths and weaknesses you've got in the organization and how you move it forward. Just some final thoughts on this, and this is the third slide, Mike, is that we do think that the community banks will get through these challenges in 2020. It's not going to be fun. We think that we will have some failures of institutions that haven't done the work necessary, but we also believe that most of our community banks are well positioned, and if they stay focused and are able to utilize the resources such as reliable IT and other sources out there, they can make the best decisions and be strategic. Again, I refer back to the pandemic pivot plan. We think that boards and managements need to spend some time on what 2020 will look like and try to move away from crisis management to more strategic management. Because for the last several weeks, we've all been in a crisis management, and it's time, it says, to look forward as to where we can take our institutions. And so with that, those are my comments.
Very good, Gary. Thank you so much. Thank you both for the insightful comments. Great way to kick off our discussion. We have had some questions come in from the audience. I'd like to get us started. Before I do, a reminder for those of you who may have joined late, if you do have a question for the panel, over on the right-hand side of your screen is a chat window. Please enter those there, and we'll do our best to get your question in front of the panel. All right, let's get started. First question. Trish, let's start with you if you don't mind. Do banks anticipate increased commercial loan requests and portfolio review activities due to the crisis? And what software are they using to aid them in these efforts?
Sorry, Lance, the first part of the question, you cut out some, so I did not hear it.
You bet, I'll read it again, the whole thing. Do banks anticipate increased commercial loan requests and portfolio review activities due to the crisis? And what software are they using to aid them in these efforts?
I personally, right now with the banks I have dealt with, have not seen that. I don't know if maybe somebody else in the panel has, and to what software. Usually, banks have their software in place for those types of programs for their commercial lending and the commercial loans that they have. To dovetail on what Christopher and also Gary was saying about the PPP programs out there right now, I would think banks are having to focus on that just based on that 10-day time frame. They're having to put all this in too, and maybe that the commercial loans have for lack of better words, hate to say it, maybe they've kind of been pushed on the back burner. But if there's anybody else on the panel that's had one of their banks or more experienced with that, that would be great if they could step in and help answer this question.
Sure, thanks, Trish. Hey, Micah, how about yourself? Do you have an answer for us on that question?
Well, we've been primarily using the software we already have in place, as Trish mentioned as well. So we've been making use of that and adapting that. Software updates come out sometimes for these programs and that support these new commercial loans and so forth. And so we work with those vendors to make sure our software is compatible and works with that and supports those new options. We haven't implemented any new software recently in support of the SBA PPP program. We've been primarily using what we have already in place and been taking advantage of our current processes and procedures to do that. So I don't have too much to add at the moment.
Okay, great, no problem. Aaron, I know that you have a number of banks that you work with. Do you have a comment, maybe specifically on the software side of that question?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. On the software, the most common software we see that our banks use, and I can't speak to how good or bad it is Laser Pro, and I think that's made by Finastra. That is the most common application for loan processing that we see.
Very good. All right, fantastic. Nikki, I'd like to move the next question to you, if you don't mind. The question is, what should banks be thinking about to reduce risk with so many employees working from home?
Well, I can speak on behalf of my bank. We are about, I'd say 70% of our workforce is working remotely from home. Aside from, I'd say, implementing things such as multi-factor authentication and mobile device management, what's worked for us is, I can speak on behalf of my bank. We activated our crisis management team and our plan as of March 13th. So right around the time Gary mentioned. And, from there, we were fortunate enough to evaluate using our business impact analysis, evaluate, who can work from home and who can't within our departments. They really utilized their BIA and performed their own stress testing. I'd say if you have a plan, document it. Apart from that, test it. And that will, that'll identify any of the gaps that you have to really focus in and improve what you can do to minimize any risk working from home.
Very good. Good answer. Thank you. Micah, how about yourself?
Well, I think it's important that whether you're working from home or you're back in the office, it's important that the bank sticks to its IT policy and operational procedures. I don't think you sacrifice that when you're sending staff to work from home. I know there's often a trade-off between checking all the boxes and doing it quickly in response to a pandemic like this. But if you have a plan, you follow the plan, and that is the safest thing to do and most cautious thing to do. Remote access, it's a privilege, and when you're elevating someone's privilege, it's best to follow those established procedures. And if you don't have a specific remote access policy, I think the key in addressing that is that there's absolutely no difference security posture-wise between a trusted device that's in the office, which it could be your PC, your laptop, a phone, and one that exists on the other end of a remote connection. So what your employees are doing at home should be covered under that same umbrella as your normal information security program. And so that should be recorded in your normal IT policy. And that's what we have done with Mission Bank. So that policy should say that you're going to treat improved remote users and devices exactly the same as any other person, the device that is approved to access your internal network. And it would be wise to have your employees understand that and acknowledge that policy. From a technology standpoint, all the normal security precautions should be taken as well. Like Nikki said, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, that's very important. You want to make sure your devices, if possible, they should be encrypted. So data at rest, that should be encrypted on your bank devices. So when they leave the office, they're secure. And you can do this using BitLocker or other forms of secure encryption. System access, again, that should be secured by multi-factor authentication wherever possible. especially that VPN access. And then there's other things you can do to protect your environment as well with things like conditional access. That's a way to secure your bank email, your internet sites, other web applications, so that access is only allowed through public IP addresses, your bank's public IP addresses. So that same requirement is through the VPN connection when working from home. So there's other things, making sure your device is up to date. And I know we've had the assistance of Reliable IT, making sure our devices are all current. We have antivirus installed and supported, and making sure everything is compliant. And so all that is key into making sure you're prepared when you send employees to work from home.
Very good. Thank you, Micah. Nikki.
I do want to add one more thing. Apart from everything Micah said, absolutely, information security training right now is key. We always are kind of in a constant state of paranoia, and this didn't relax it one bit. It was an issue amongst our crisis management team whether or not to relax that a little bit, as far as, focusing on making sure everybody can work from home. But apart from that, my training continued, and it was geared towards best practices working from home, as Micah said. It should be treated the same. Just because you're working from home doesn't mean that you're not following your company's IT policies. If anything, that needs to be ingrained even more so amongst those members that are notorious for perhaps clicking on links or, are wanderers when it comes to browsing online. But I think an uptick in information security training, phishing emails, maybe geared towards campaigns centered around the COVID-19 relief, disaster funds, etc. But definitely information security training remains top of mind.
Very good. Thank you for that add-on. It was valuable. So, Micah, let's move back to you. Oh, Trish, did you have a comment? No, I'm sorry. Micah, let's move back to you for the next one. It's a follow-up to the previous question. Specifically, how is your bank handling internal meetings, lower level, high level meetings, all the way up to board meetings?
Sure. We've really been taking advantage of a few team collaboration tools and meeting tools for all of our internal meetings and external meetings as well. As a company, we've really fully embraced Microsoft Teams as the go-to for scheduling and holding most internal meetings. These are usually department meetings, one-on-ones, brainstorming sessions, things like that. For our board and committee related meetings, we've already been using GoToMeeting, so we continue to use that tool for most of those specific meetings. But generally, our users have been collaborating and meeting together using Microsoft Teams. We've been on Office 365 for several years now, and Teams comes free along with that, with their business licensing. So I really encourage anyone that has that licensing, if you have that entitled, to have Teams, take advantage of that and embrace it. It's been incredibly effective for us during this pandemic.
Yeah, no, I agree. We use that internally as well. Trish, have you seen any innovative solutions for meetings?
You can go so far as with your customers, FaceTime. Using that if you don't, of course, Zoom, as we all know, Zoom has been out there everywhere, not real secure. But I've even personally used Zoom to hold some meetings, not with clients, but in other ways. But those are the ones I've outside of the Teams or Office 365.
Okay, great. Thanks, Trish. Nikki, how about yourself? What is your bank using for internal communications for meetings and such?
Sure. We've been utilizing GoToMeeting a lot with just our departments. And then as far as our board meetings are concerned, now I come from a bank. We're about 350 million in assets. However, a lot of our board members are not we're not on the fast track as far as, you know, teleconferencing, digital transformation, but we're getting there, right? So this pandemic really tested and, you know, forced our board to really evaluate, okay, hey, you know, for my own safety, we can't be coming to the bank. You know, we can't use that time to, you know, sit in our conference room, although, you know, we're in a big high-rise building in Glendale, beautiful space. However, they can't come there. So what do? So we've been utilizing GoToMeeting a lot, and they're learning as well, which is awesome. It's not by chance, but this month alone, we've had several board committee meetings planned. Usually they're on a quarterly basis, but they all fell within this month. So it was a good test to our systems and good test for our people.
Very good. Thank you, Nikki. Trish, the next question comes for you. Trish, we know that you've worked with many banks on their pandemic planning and have helped and watched the execution of that planning. What do you find are the key lessons learned?
Well, I think right now the lessons are to be flexible, right? I mean, people have had to be flexible. And early on, I had, you know, everybody at the end of 2019 was making sure they were getting their disaster recovery plans tested, or the beginning of 2020, and where this pandemic was just kind of starting to happen. You know, I asked the banks, you know, make sure you document everything, you know, what your lessons that you're learning, right? What is working, not what's working, what doesn't work, in order to enhance your plan. You're not gonna we have these plans in place, but you're not gonna have everything in there until you actually experience something. So this is a really great opportunity that will come out of this pandemic, is that the one thing I have noticed that's kind of jumped out to me is, and Gary spoke to this, and I think maybe Christopher might have too, is budget. Like your impact to especially your IT budget, from your initial cost of purchasing equipment to work from home. You know, the licensing. I know a bank that had a server go down unexpectedly in the middle of this, which, as we all know, can happen, that they had to purchase that. And then what is that going to look like going forward? Now that you have all these equipments, let's say your bank went out and had to buy 20 laptops, you know, how are you going to work those in to your patching, even so much as storing, maintaining this? That's all going to impact your IT budget, not to speak of the whole, you know, budget overall of the bank, with those PPP programs and the loan processing of that. And somebody mentioned it, you know, that people working around the clock. What is that looking like to the bank's overall budget? Gary said, you know, it's going to get thrown out the window or out the door. So that's one of the main things that I think is really popped up to me for on the IT side is the budget. What is it going to do to your budget?
Very good. Thank you, Trish. Appreciate it. Another question from the audience. Micah, let's start with you on this one. What's expected for audits and exams related to interagency guidance versus existing bank plan execution and potential gaps?
That's a really good question. You know, there's a lot of risk associated with this pandemic. When ones are working from home, there's things you have to take in consideration. So I think documenting, good documentation through this pandemic, as Trish brought out, is key. I think how you resolve those issues and how you address those issues is key as well. And as far as just making sure, reviewing your strategic plan, your policies, your procedures, making sure that it fits in line with how you are handling and managing your bank. I think if you're prepared in advance, always the better, right? So as soon as if we start going back to the office, we know this pandemic, who knows, we may be back in office in the summer, we don't know. And then again, we may be out working from home again in the fall when the flu and cold season happens again. And so taking the time that we have now, if things are slower, reviewing how we're handling our procedures and policies, addressing that now, and making sure we're following those, I think that's going to be key. And the auditors will be looking for that.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Micah. Thoughtful answer. Nikki, this next question comes to you. Nikki, Micah mentioned, Microsoft Teams as a technology that he's using more readily during this pandemic. Is there one technology that you felt has helped you best during the crisis?
Apart from, it's funny you mentioned that, because we were literally in the works of integrating with Teams as soon as our crisis management team met, about a week, I had it scheduled about a month prior that our crisis management team was going to come together and learn Teams. But apart from it, like I mentioned earlier, GoToMeeting, we're using teleconferencing within departments and within our audit and our board committees. Coincidentally, we were also in the middle of a bandwidth upgrade, so that helped us a lot. But on the digital front, I would like to speak about that as far as our customers are concerned. There's really been a push towards using our digital architecture, our digital platforms when it comes to utilizing online banking, mobile banking, and really, really pushing for that to minimize, obviously, lobby traffic and help protect our people. But on top of that, showing our customers, this isn't something, yes, it's expected for most banks to have it already, right? But really showing our customers, yeah, we do have it and you can use it too. So that's really definitely been extremely helpful. Apart from that, we also have been utilizing electronic signatures a lot, not only within our staff, our employees, things that we've had to sign because we've had to relax our policies a little bit as far as accepting wet signatures and understand that, okay, hey, we need to have a process and plan to handle electronic signatures, not only within our staff, but within our customers as well.
Very good. Thank you, Nikki. A follow-up to that. Oh, Micah, yes, go ahead. You have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Nikki on Microsoft Teams. We were actually going through the pilot when this pandemic really kickstarted in the beginning of March. About 20% of our staff were using it, and we had staff. Our IT department already had been using it for about a year, but our operations staff has started using it, and those at branches too. And we really had to kick that into motion and fully utilizing it to 100% within the next 2 weeks after that. But we haven't looked back since. We had trainings. We partnered with our training department and hosting several training events. We had one training event for the entire company, and we've worked with individual departments in training. And it's been a really easy and seamless transition to that, from Skype for Business to Teams. And just one other shout out I want to throw out to is Fortinet. We use them for our firewalls, and we use that for our VPN solution, and it has been handling this pandemic extremely well, better than I actually anticipated. So I give a lot of credit to them as well, to the equipment we had and to the software and reliable IT support as well, and getting that solution functioning for us a couple years ago.
Thanks, Micah. Appreciate that. Aaron, I'd like to tag a question on for you. Are there technologies? Well, let me start over. We all are feeling like we're about to get out of this crisis. In the next few weeks, a lot of our industries are reopening, things are reopening, and we're going to talk some about that later today. But there are many of us that are talking about maybe having this happen again in the fall. You know what I mean? Where, maybe the virus re-kicks in. Maybe you could speak to if certain groups don't have some software or a technology in place today, what should they be considering getting in place between now and maybe episode 2?
Sure. Well, thanks, Lance. There's several technologies, and it certainly depends on your current setup, but I give you 3 to consider. One being terminal server. So if you're not familiar with that, terminal server allows remote users to work pretty seamlessly by publishing applications and documents to a server versus using those applications on your local desktop. So when you have people working remote with minimal bandwidth, it's very helpful. The challenge this time, because we did have banks ask to get that set up, is the time it takes to set up. It takes easily several weeks to a month. In some cases, we have to go buy a server or get licensing. You have to test it. So it takes a while to set up, but it's fairly inexpensive. Most of our clients and most banks will have the resources on their current infrastructure to have that available now. So I would certainly consider setting up a terminal server in advance of that. 2 would be Microsoft 365, which is what we already talked about a little bit here, was brought up by Micah and Nikki. But we've had a number of banks take advantage of Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, conditional access, multi-factor authentication through Microsoft 365. And if you haven't used Teams before, it's more than just a meeting system. It's really a platform that to some degree integrates with SharePoint and Microsoft's file system, OneDrive. So you can do a lot more than just share video. There's a lot of document collaboration and security that's built around it. So I'd certainly take advantage of Microsoft 365. And then third, which I think we're going to all start hearing a lot more about over the next couple of years, and so I'd certainly consider it, is Microsoft's virtual desktop. It provides an opportunity to provide a really quick, secure way to allow staff to work remotely or not tied to a physical piece of hardware. It can greatly improve security, very scalable, and in certain circumstances can even reduce cost. So I think over the next couple of years, we'll see a lot more banks either piloting or considering Microsoft Virtual Desktop.
Very good. Thank you, Aaron. Gary, we'd like to go back to you. I know that you're not showing your picture right now, but we don't want to forget about you. Have you seen any innovative solutions for, collaboration tools? What are you seeing groups, the people you're working with, use today?
Well, a lot of our banking institutions are reaching out to their technology providers to assist them in, how they spread their loans going forward, how they connect basically with their customers. One of the things that I thought was fascinating from both, from all the comments before, is that these banks are doing an exceptional job with regard to their platform within their banking institution. But when we're having to connect with the customers, we're finding this is that a lot of those customers were not prepared for the pandemic. It says so we have a kind of a breakdown in the link of communication between our customers and our banking institutions. And frankly, we think that a lot of the banks are basically really testing technology and third-party providers with regard to establishing that type of connection or bond. And we think that we've seen some interesting platforms. I don't know all of the names of them with regard to how banks are utilizing third-party providers to connect better with their customers. I did want to add one thing, and both Micah and Nikki basically talked about how they're handling board meetings. What we're fascinated right now is that we're in shareholder meeting season for a lot of our banking institutions. And so we have a number of our institutions that are actually thinking about virtual meetings for purposes of their shareholders. And unfortunately in California, we don't have the laws that allow for virtual meeting unless you're basically a public type of entity. And so we've had a lot of them push out meetings, and hopefully we'll get some language from the governor that allows for a virtual shareholder meeting going forward. But I'd be interested to see what Texas is seeing and some other ones, because we think that's going to be where the rest of 2019 is going to be, 2020 is going to be on a virtual meeting. So sorry to divert there, but that was something that I was interested when Nikki and Michael were talking.
No, that's a great diversion. And Chris, I saw you raise your hand. I was coming to you anyway. What's going on in Texas with this?
Yeah, so we do have a little bit more flexibility in our business code in Texas to allow for the virtual meeting. Now, the banks in most cases have had to go in and update their governance documents to allow for those virtual or distance meetings. So that's one consideration. You know, not just what's allowable by law, but what's allowable within your internal governance documents. So we've seen a number of banks do that. Some are still pushing out their annual shareholder meetings and things like that in hopes that they'll be able to get together over the summer. I've seen a lot of July dates pop up, a lot of optimism in that regard. But otherwise, yeah, people are mobilizing to try to take things virtually, using a lot of the same tools that we've talked about. The GoToWebinars, I think, you know, obviously the Zoom considerations are keeping people away from that. But folks have, I would say, even with some of the board member technological challenges that are there, have pivoted fairly well to go ahead and take those meetings virtually.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. Nikki, yeah.
Thanks, guys. I may be going out a little bit on the limb here, but I would like to bring up, you know, referencing a question previously on interagency guidelines, okay, on examiners, how auditors are handling, I mean, they're in this pandemic as well, right? So, you know, what I've noticed as far as collaboration, you know, they're forced to take a lot of their exams, they're already scheduled exams off site, and it's continuing. Now, within our particular bank, we do have an upcoming exam, and it's going to be interesting to see how they are going to facilitate that. I can say, you know, a majority of our exam is still going to be off-site. So, you know, making sure that these systems, not only with our banks, but with our examiners, what do they have in place, you know, as far as collaborating with their, you know, the banks. Interesting to see.
Yeah, you bet, Nikki. Thank you. Trish, did you have something to add to that?
I did, just because I am working with a bank that was in the middle of an exam when this started, when the pandemic started. They were scheduled, you know, to come out the pandemic in California. You know, everything closed down. They did take it, Nikki, off site, and were conducting it. And then I've never seen this happen. They stopped it. They stopped the exam.
Yes.
I don't know when it's going to start back up. That the bank hasn't been told yet, and I don't know what was the reason why they decided to discontinue doing it online. Because as you well know, when you prepare for an exam, and especially on the IT side, with all the questionnaire that you have and all the documentation you upload to the you know, whatever your regulatory body is, to their portals, they've got everything and can go through it. So I just found that really interesting that they actually stopped.
Very good. Chris, what do you have to add?
Yeah, you know, I think this has made us all get comfortable with technology faster than we probably otherwise would have. You know, I think Micah and Nikki jumping into Teams when you were kind of just at the early outset of implementing those. Same's got to be true for the examiners as well. And I think the state of technologies that relates to exams and the ability to facilitate offsite work has been honestly too painstakingly slow. And I hope that this pushes the examiners, the agencies, to go ahead and implement technology that would have been a little slower to roll out. This is another thing too, though, I think that we need to be mindful of. Gary spoke a lot about just that pandemic pivot plan, and I think there are probably a number of technologies that banks were looking at implementing as part of their strategic plan 2 or 3 years in the future. For a smaller bank, I think of remote account opening, for instance. Many still don't have a solution implemented for that. As you look at that plan that you do have in place, and you now think about the fact that your customers have become more reliant on technology, you have, your board members have, your staff has, everybody has been forced to get more comfortable with technology. It provides a great strategic opportunity to accelerate some of those plans. But it's also a good time right now, even while everybody's so busy and focused on the things that they have that's immediately in front of them, I worry about, this is a great problem to have, but I worry about those technology vendors 3, 4, 5 months from now who get this influx of banks reaching out to them, wanting to better understand their options or what their solutions look like. So I think now is a good time to go ahead and initiate some of those conversations. I promise you that the technology vendors that you're calling, they're not getting a lot of feedback from banks right now. So now's a really good time to go ahead and start some of those conversations if you know you're going to accelerate some of your needs in the future.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. Nikki.
I would like to add on Christopher's note, as far as really looking at our vendors. Vendor management doesn't stop here. Really looking at our vendors to see, okay, how are they handling this, and how are they going to, do they have the resiliency, right? Is there continuity within their operations? It's a great time for banks to examine who they're currently with, just to see, can we move forward? Can they help us carry through, or can they help carry us through this pandemic? So I think really key vendor management plays a crucial role in your pandemic plan and your overall business continuity plan.
Very good. Very good. Good add, Nikki. Thank you. So we've got time for about one more question to kind of pass through the panel. One of the things we've talked a lot about is this transition to working from home. Aaron, I'd like to start it with you and then maybe kick it to a couple of the other members of the panel. What kind of scams, what kind of attacks are we seeing for people that have been working in an office, they're now working at home, the guard may be down a little bit more? What kind of attacks are you seeing?
Well, the overall attacks are certainly up. The FBI they reported a quadruple in attempts and cybercrime in just the last 45 days. And many of our security partners that we work with reported something similar. So a big surge of activity, a lot of it phishing and bogus websites. And, a big target before was this retail sector, which, historically has been one of the top targets, but that's sort of contracted some because there's not as many retailers doing business. So you see a lot of those bad actors focusing on industries like the financial industry and the healthcare. So to Nikki's point, it's really a time to step up some of that security awareness. Because we got emails coming out, and pretty good ones that we've seen, where there are emails disguised as the World Health Organization or CDC, Johns Hopkins, those scammers, Russian scammers, bought some pretty good domains that looked fairly real. Even though I think Google is blocking, I think it's 18 million websites related to COVID scams per day, there's still a lot out there. So it's our recommendation that you step up some of your security awareness, even internally in our IT, and we're an IT and security company, increase the amount of phishing tests we did. So we doubled it. We became pretty fanatical that in the last 30 days that you do some additional security awareness training. Just ask anyone who works here. We're totally on top of that. And really reminding users to be vigilant. Because the number of cyber attacks has gone way up in the last 45 days.
Very good. Thank you, Aaron. And we talked a little bit during the discussion about two-factor authentication. We talked a little bit about electronic and digital signatures. Nikki, there was a follow-up question. I want to make sure we get to this. It was a follow-up question to a comment you made earlier, and that is about electronic versus digital signatures. Can you speak more about what your bank is using?
Sure. Well, electronic signatures, we utilize Adobe Sign. And as far as digital signatures within our customers, now we have been ongoing for about a year now, rolling out online account opening. And with that, things like signature cards and, just the integration within your core system. We've utilized a product called eSign via Adobe Sign as well. So that tool has really, really helped us. We utilize electronic signatures among staff to things like, thankfully, we are still getting paid. So your signed timesheets within, staff needing signatures, let's just say from senior management, sign-offs, just, you know, things that require dual control within the banks. That's how we accept electronic signatures. As far as digital signatures are concerned, we are having to reevaluate certain processes like new accounts, maybe not utilizing our online account opening platform just yet, but new accounts. You know, there has not been, I know for a fact that particular process has not been relaxed one bit. If anything, there's been an uptick in new accounts. So their operations has really, you know, needed to come together and figure out and establish processes on how to accept digital signatures with that.
Very good. Thank you, Nikki. And unfortunately, that's our time for the day. I apologize if we did not get to your question, but I thought the panel did a great job. Thank you all for your participation. We're going to be doing a short survey following this. We'd asked all of the participants to share their opinions with us. Please tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and we'd like to know what we should do better next time. So before you depart, Mike McWilliams has a brief announcement about our next program.
Thanks, Lance. I'll get started talking before my pitcher comes up, which perfectly fine. But again, as Lance said, you know, the first thing I'd like to do is just thank everybody. You know, Trish and Micah and Nikki, Christopher, Aaron, and Gary. Thank you very much for being a part of this. You guys did a fantastic job in providing education to our banks and our customers, our prospects, and the people that we look forward to working with in the future. Team, we are going to, I think a lot of people understood that we were going to be putting on a Texas summit and a California summit. Texas was postponed. California is still on for October, but we're going to continue with this emergency survival guide for the remainder of the year and doing these webinars and trying to bring educational topics to bear. And so with that said, we are going to be doing a survey, and if you would be so kind and just say, hey, this is the type of topics I'd like to see talked about, and we'll do our best to bring a nice mixture of clients and technology to the table so that you guys can get some great benefit from it. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody once more. I look forward to meeting each and every one of you at a future time, and thank you again. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Be safe.